American lady. Okay, we've already got some people joining, which is great. We'll
Fantastic.
probably give it about 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and then we'll get
We'll
started.
2 minutes, and then we'll do some introductions. We'll run through the agenda, and hopefully by the end of the 60 minutes that we've got everyone for, they'll leave with some golden nuggets they can take away back to their charities. So apologies just for this. It's always the awkward 2 minutes when everyone comes on, and we just want to make sure that anybody who's having any technical issues or having to re-download or update Zoom just has the opportunity to do that. What we will say is this has been recorded, so anything that you do here, if you need to go back over and recover anything, you can find this recording on the Oaks YouTube channel. And I believe we may send out the link afterwards in any case. So please don't feel like you have to take a whole bunch of notes today. There will be opportunities to answer questions as well. And I know some people have been kind enough to submit some questions in advance, and Will and I will do our best to address them at the end of the webinar. We'll just give it 1 more minute and then we'll get cracking. Okay, Tilly, can you just bring up the agenda, please? Thank you. So firstly, thanks for everyone who has taken the time out of your busy day to join myself and Will as part of the Oaks team who are going to be running today's webinar. We hope that we've got some familiar faces who have joined us as part of the series. This is just a continuation of some of the other sessions that we've done. And we'll this is not the end of the session, so we've still got some other webinars to follow. And for those who haven't been part of the kind of wider journey, by all means, go back and check out what we've done in the past. There's some fantastic articles on the website. We've got a really good bundle for charities that gives some insight into some of the key areas that we look to support organisations in. That's all free. And then we've also got all of our past content on our YouTube channel as well. So in terms of today's agenda, it's pretty self-explanatory. I'll do a little bit of introductions and housekeeping. We'll then just run through what the topic of today is, so the vision and mission definitions and examples, the benefits of why you would have a robust vision and mission, what are the key influential factors, how charities arrive, why you're all here, why you arrive at a robust vision and mission, exploring some of the kind of key questions and challenges that you've posed to us, and then we'll just finish up with some closing remarks. So in terms of housekeeping, there are, hopefully no planned fire drills. If you hear one, it's in your location and you probably should evacuate. In terms of asking questions, there is an opportunity at the bottom. There's a Q&A. So even during the presentation, if you'd like to ask any questions, we'll do our best to answer them. And we've got someone who will keep track of us. And that's really it. We hopefully this will be engaging. We've got some questions and opportunities for you to interact with each other and with us as panelists. And hopefully it's not just a death by PowerPoint, because we know that nobody likes them. So in terms of introductions then, my name's Paul Findlay. I'm Director of Charities here at Oaks. I sit across all of the different areas that we work across charities. So we do a lot of fantastic work in the income generation space, strategy development. Obviously, this forms part of that. We also do a lot of capacity building, governance reviews we do. So we work across a number of organisations, from very, very kind of grassroots-led organisations right up to international charities as well. And we're very, very fortunate to have some unbelievable clients, some of whom are on the call today. So that's myself. I'll pass over to my colleague Will, who'll do a brief introduction.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name's Will. I'm one of Oaks's strategy consultants, and I essentially work across the majority of our strategy development clientele, so spanning from education to charities to sport for development organizations. And I'm really eager to kind of take what we do on a daily basis and what we've learned and really apply it to this webinar. So many thanks for joining. And I think my only aspiration for this webinar is that the attendees listening today know what step one is after today. That's all I want. And that's, if we can achieve that, then I'll consider this as a success.
Fantastic. Cheers, Will. Right, so we're going to go into a little bit of an activity here. And unfortunately, there's no prizes, but there's also no public shame if you don't get them right. We're just going to look at some brands that exist out there, some very, very famous brands, and what their mission, what some of their vision statements are. So this is an opportunity. Just pop in the chat, put a 1, 2, or 3 next to it if you can name who these brands are. So the first one, to make the best products on earth and to leave the world better than we found it. Vision number 2, to make people happy. Pretty simple. And vision number 3, which is actually a charity brand, to grant the wish of every eligible child. So just put in who you think it is, like I said, and then we'll cover off what they are. And we'll just have a little brief discussion as to how we feel that they resonate with each of you.
Mark's been very quick.
Mark's very quick.
Quick off the mark.
And no Googling, please. Everyone else is either giving it some real deliberation, other than Mark, or actually scrambling, typing in their Google search bar at the moment, trying to find out.
Yeah, Mark, see if you can get the number 2.
Yeah, so Mark is spot on with 1 and 3. So let's see if anybody can get number 2. What brand do we think exists to make people happy? And I'll even give some people a clue. If I just move out the way slightly, that might give people a little clue as to who it could be. Which this was not intentional. There we go. Yeah, Disney. So if we just move on to the next slide, please tell you. So yeah, major brand was Apple, Disney, and Make-A-Wish. And I think Apple, obviously, depend if you're Apple or Android, but as an Apple person myself, I do think they make, some of the best products, from whether it be Macs or, phones, iPads, whatever it may be. And then, the major brand Disney, yeah. I think if anybody that's been to Disney, that's what every Imagineer's kind of core purpose as part of their job is, just to, make people happy. And then the last one, very self-explanatory, Make-A-Wish Foundation. So yeah, we went through quite a few of these just to kind of look at. Some of them were very, very obvious, and some of them were actually probably a little too difficult. So we felt that most people would have a chance at those. So just quickly, what I'd like to ask you is, do you feel that those visions are externally facing, internally facing, or a bit of both? What's your view on that?
I think the Apple one, particularly, if you could just go back a slide, I think the Apple one predominantly, that would galvanize me as a staff member. I want to make the best products on earth, and I want to leave the world better than we found it. That doesn't mean too much to me as a customer, really. I think the Disney one, to make people happy, I think that can resonate with both. And I think the charity one, Make-A-Wish Foundation, that almost has to relate to both beneficiaries and internal staff, because to grant the wish of every eligible child, that's communicating the purpose of the organization. But I think there's some subtle nuances between for-profits and non-for-profits, where I would say the non-for-profits, probably their vision needs to be more widespread. It needs to be objective to a variety of partners, whether it be beneficiaries or funders. But for profit organizations, I would say it's predominantly internal.
Yeah, I think I would agree, and some people are kind of commenting as well. Yeah, that's really useful, Will, and I suppose that will just lead into some of what we're talking about today in terms of who the audience is, and I know we come to that later on in your session. So if we just want to move on then and actually look at what the kind of core definition is, and I'll hand over to you, mate, to kind of lead on from this point.
Great. Great. So before I start getting into the crux of defining vision and mission statements, I just wanted to bring something else to light. You see vision and mission statements everywhere. Most organizations have them, most non-for-profit organizations have them in place. And I think when everyone's got something and your organization doesn't have that something, I think that can create a culture or perception of these things are tokenistic. And these things are something we can just create in an hour or however long, and normally kind of done by one person. And I think the one thing that I wanted to stress before we kind of started getting into the crux of the webinar was these statements are a product of a larger conversation and a larger piece of work. And the best vision and mission statements that we see oftentimes are a combination of everybody rallying together and coming together to create these statements. And Paul, I can't tell you how many times we've had this where we've gone into work with a client on a strategy project, and we go in to talk about vision and mission, and then the perception of the room is, oh, these are throwaway statements. This is a marketing and comms tool. And then as we start to go through the strategy development process, then all of a sudden everyone wants to start editing, everyone wants to start building up these conversations that are previously almost distant in the strategy development process, because now we're actually being held to account for our direction. That's something I wanted to get across initially. So these things really are important. They can be super impactful if we get them right. And I'm not going to read. I imagine while I was talking, you've kind of read the blurb there. But in short, your vision is a destination. Your mission is how you get there. So to use an analogy, your vision is a beautiful painting of your perfect, idealistic future for your charity or the beneficiaries you represent. The mission is almost the paintbrushes, the canvas, the artist, the coloring, all the stuff that you need to do to create your vision. And that's vision and mission. Next slide, please. So here we have some examples. And I think this is really important to show the breadth of where these statements can come from. And we'll explore later on in terms of what influences our vision and mission statements. But the first one, a world without Alzheimer's disease. Now, Alzheimer's Association probably won't see a world without Alzheimer's, but everyone in that organization and everyone that wants to work with that organization, whether it be a funder or a corporate partner, knows exactly what they're striving towards. Feed the children. I'm going to have to move my camera thing. Create a world where no child goes to bed hungry. Carers Trust. Unpaid carers are heard and valued, with access to support, advice, and resources to enable them to live fulfilled lives. And then Laureus Sport for Good, using the power of sport to end violence, discrimination, and disadvantage, proving that sport can change the world. And just on that last one, some of these I like, and some of these I don't like as much. I think the Laureus Sport for Good one, my favorite bit of that statement is proving that sport can change the world. I think if it was just that, that would be massively more impactful. But we really wanted to show you the kind of the breadth of where these statements can come from. And some of these organizations that you see on the slide are organizations that we've worked on, and we've created these vision statements. Now, just moving on to mission. So, sport in mind, to improve the lives of people who experience mental health problems through sport and physical activity. The National Brain Appeal, to drive world-class neurological innovation, treatment, and advancement through bold, ambitious fundraising and investment. Carers Trust, we work to transform the lives of unpaid carers through collaboration, influence, evidence, and innovation. And then TED, spread ideas, quite simply. And the National Brain Appeal and the Carers Trust example, these are examples that we're looking to talk through later on to really show how we as a consultancy approach these organizations in a different way to determine their vision and mission. Great. So what is the purpose of vision and mission statements? Why do we need them? And we've almost split this into two categories. And what we've really tried to think about is what these statements can lead towards. So internal, I'm not going to go through all of these points, but internally it provides a guide to the strategy. Once you've established the vision and mission, everything within the strategy development process cascades from the vision and mission. So everything that you do after solidifying your vision and mission statements has to relate back to your vision and mission. And also the next 2 points, fostering unity and motivating staff. I've added a slight caveat into to this point. If I'm a staff member in a charity, and I fed in to the creation of a vision and mission statement, to our vision and mission statement, and I can see my aspirations reflected in those statements, I'm much more likely to become unified and be motivated by those statements. So I think the benefit internally can be galvanizing your staff teams, but we need to make sure that we are including them in the process. Measuring and demonstrating impact. This is a real key one. Throughout your strategy, charities tend to do lots of things, work with lots of people, and do lots of activities. Charities tend to start out with quite a narrowed focus, and as funding pots become more available, that focus becomes more widespread. Having a robust vision and mission statement, that's your guiding principle, that's your rule. Everything that you do, whether it be creation of impact reports, whether it be your programs, has to relate or contribute towards your vision. Also, cultivating innovation, and probably one of the most important ones there is a recruitment tool. You need to make sure that your vision and mission statements are at the forefront of your recruitment materials, because if I'm a prospective employee, I need to make sure that when I'm joining a charity that I'm bought into the vision, and you need to make sure that it's at the forefront, so you get the right people in that are aligned to what you're trying to do. Now, externally, communicating your external vision and mission it helps narrow your focus. It helps make you distinct. If you're a charity sitting here in this webinar and thinking, I'm operating in a space that's quite highly competitive, your vision statement can really set you apart from the rest. It communicates your purpose, your focus, and direction to stakeholders. Everyone from all of the stakeholders you work with, whether it be funders, corporate partners, donors, staff, beneficiaries, they need to be able to view and read your vision and mission statements and know exactly what or where you're trying to go. And this is where I think back to my earlier point when we were talking about the difference between for-profit vision and missions to a charity vision and mission, because you work with so many different stakeholders and they all need to be aligned on what you're trying to do. And that's, I think, a unique challenge for charities. Also, if you have a major funder or a corporate partner that you really want to bring into the fold, maybe your vision and mission statement needs to align to what theirs is or their priorities. It starts to build trust, it inspires action, and really it spotlights and draws attention to the problem or the challenge your organization is there to solve. And I'll leave Paul to kind of ask that question down at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, thanks. So I think it's just going back over one of your points. I think it's really important, like you say, that your vision is your North Star. You know, that's the thing that you're always striving towards. And, you know, having worked in the charity space and having now, you know, supporting charitable organisations, it is easy to get pulled away from the North Star. If, like you mentioned, funding pots or lack of funding might mean that you change and you pivot. And obviously organisations having to be, especially in this climate, having to be agile is important, but you've always got to look at why you exist and why you exist and what your vision is. And somebody in the chat, you know, Megan put a really good point in there around what would the world look like if you've achieved your vision, you know, and getting to the point where you actually don't have to exist anymore. You know, you've achieved your charitable objects, and that's not a negative slant on any charity. You know, if a charity achieves what it, you know, if Alzheimer's becomes no more, as an example, then there's no need for the Alzheimer's Association. If they've eradicated it, if cancer research cure cancer, there's no need for cancer research anymore. That's not a bad thing. But just moving on to some of the, the question at the bottom around, what do you want your vision and mission to achieve for your charity or the organisation that you represent? And that's, for you to put into the chat if you feel comfortable. You might not have a vision and mission. That might be why you're here. You want to kind of learn some of the work that we are doing and take away some lessons that you can take back. But we'd love to just hear from some people on the call in terms of what they want their vision and mission to achieve. And that might just give us a little insight into who we've got on the call as well. Mark's put make sport impactful. It's always hard when you're on the Zooms because, I think when you're doing these sessions face to face, it's amazing because you can see people and you can engage with the audience. It's very difficult that we can't see any of you, so we know you're all there, but not being able to see you is always a limitation when we're doing these webinars. But it does allow us to obviously cast the net far and wide and give people access that may not be able to attend in person. So Naomi's put support people with inflammatory breast cancer to live well. Lisa, to see children, teenagers, adults and their families living with single ventricle heart condition, cope with the diagnosis of their condition and support them as they strive to achieve their full potential. There really seems to be a theme coming out about giving the people the opportunity to really succeed. And that's what, that's a really aspirational but also measurable outcome. 70 miles of tranquil, connected canal and towpaths restored to an operational state by 2040 with a viable maintenance plan for walking, running, cycling, fishing, boating and education with overwhelming environmental and ecological benefit. Thanks, Martin. Again, a really ambitious, and what I like about that, Martin, is you've actually set a time limit. So where we are saying some organisations may never achieve their vision, but they're going to strive towards it. You've set a very defined, time limit to achieve, an exact outcome, which is 70 miles, and then obviously your mission. And Daniel, shelter for all, the vision, shelter for all, and the mission, sustainable development that leaves no one homeless. Straight to the point. I think that's really, really important when sometimes it's just about making it very, 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 very clear for those who want to see. So look, and I think by all means keep them coming. There's some really, really good ones in there. Well, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add.
I think just on Daniel's point, and I think there was a separate point by Lisa. I think the real challenge, I think that charities are quite complex, and I think the real challenge that charity leaders face is trying to condense all that you do or want to do into one sentence. It can be really difficult, and that's where, and I think almost the longer the vision is, the more impact you lose. Because the shelter for all, that's really impactful. I understand that. That's almost like a strap line. But when you start to get into the detail of that vision statement, I think then it becomes a bit more of a paragraph. Something you have to read. You have to read through and then understand and digest. And I appreciate the massive challenge when your charity is super complex and you're trying to get all of your aspirations into one statement. But I think hopefully some of the stuff we'll talk through next on the webinar will be able to support that. Great. So now we wanted to, because if it was up to us, we could just, the charity leaders or the internal staff could create our vision and mission statements, and that could be all fine and dandy. But unfortunately, charities live in a world where they have multiple powers that dictate what they do and when they do it. So if we could just go to the next slide. So these are almost questions that I wanted to kind of ask the room. So the first one is capacity. How much does our internal capabilities, resources, or finances dictate our aspiration? Do we want to make sure that our vision statement is something that we can achieve, or do we want to be like the Alzheimer's Association and just have a North Star, as you termed it, Paul, to strive towards. Because the vision for the organization, I would argue, is something that is constant, it's continuous, and it's something that will be part of a 5 year strategy, but will also be part of the next 5 year strategy and the next one after that. Then your external environment. How can we ensure that if we're in a sector that's quite volatile, for instance, if you were to create a strategy in 2019 as a charity, you might as well rip that up and throw it away because the context has changed massively and the parameters in which you find yourself have adapted. How can we make sure that we're staying vigilant to our external environment and the changes within it? Competitive landscape. How do we ensure that our vision and mission statements incite collaboration and don't incite competitivity? And then coupling with that, how can we make sure that we're distinct? How can we make sure that the head of our charity is above the parapet? Our ethics and values. How much does the values or the existing values of our organization dictate our aspiration for the future? How do we make sure that we really channel the aspirations of our staff teams? And what do we do if we have our board that think X and our staff that think Y? How do we come out of that situation with a concise vision and mission statement that is reflective of all? Beneficiaries and community engagement. Will our strategic direction align directly to our beneficiaries? How do we keep, and I think this links in with the external environment point, how do we keep our ears and our nose to the ground to ensure that everything that we're doing is reflective of our beneficiaries' needs? And the next two actually are really important. If we're a charity and 80% of our funding comes from one funder, how much is where that fund is going strategically affecting where we're going? Are we simply saying, okay, we rely on this income? We need to ensure that whatever this funder does in the future, whatever strategic priorities they outline, we make sure that we're following alongside. And the same with corporate partners. We need to ask ourselves, how much do we need to own our aspiration? Then other stakeholder feedback, donors, volunteers. We need to make sure we understand what they're saying and we're hearing what they're saying, because I think a lot of the time our perception of our charity or what we offer or our purpose is different in the internal environment than it is in the external environment. And someone who's a beneficiary or volunteer might have a different perception than someone as a charity lead or internal staff teams. And then impact assessments. How to what extent are we channeling our aspiration to what we know we do well? So in a very impact assessments show, we're doing something really well. We're redeveloping towpaths and we're striving forward and we're doing really well. How much does our aspiration reflect that? So, and we have another question there, and I think Paul may have put it in the chat. We really want to know what other things or aspects of your charity's internal or external environment influence your vision or will influence your vision and mission. So it'd be great again if you could drop those in the chat, and Paul, I'll leave you for any other remarks.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think again, what we would emphasise here is, and Will and I actually discussed this yesterday when we were out for lunch, that we don't have a template that we just lift and drop into every client, whether that be a sports client, a charity client, an education client, one of our clients in social housing or the local authorities that we work with. We appreciate that every single client is unique, and even those charities that have got the same subsector, whether it be health and wellbeing, whether it be military, whether it be art and culture, we know that every single charity has different considerations and different challenges. And you should also make sure that you're looking at your own intricacies. So, there might be parts on here that Will mentioned that just do not relate to you, and that's absolutely fine. There may be other parts that are more relevant than others, and they're quite likely parts that we haven't considered, because again, we don't know the inner workings of each of you. So, I suppose from this point, and the question around what other influences affect your specific charity or the direction that you're moving in, that might be a question you can't actually answer just now. And again, that's absolutely fine, but it's a question that we wanted to pose just for you to go away and think about. And if you do know, or you've given it some consideration, by all means, add some content into the chat. That'd be fantastic. But we know that how individual every charity is, how the beneficiary groups are individual and the donors are individual and the income streams, some are diverse and some aren't. And that's an area that we support a lot of clients on, is how do they diversify their income so that they're not beholden to a single funder or a single grant giver or a single wealthy individual or a corporate, that they can actually have autonomous thinking because they've got different income streams. So that's really important. And it might be that actually you're part of a wider membership organisation of a body of charities, or you're a charitable arm of a corporate entity, and then you're actually kind of tied to what the corporate's vision and mission is, and you have to adapt to that. So there's lots of different factors that when we're doing this work with our clients, that we really take into consideration. And what we're trying to do today is just show you that you're not alone. If you're sitting there thinking, how are we so different from anybody else? Everybody in the call is the same, and every one of the clients that we work with are the same. So, don't ever beat yourself up if you don't have all the answers, because quite often we sit down with, clients who have got vast resources and they don't have all the answers. So if you're a smaller charity with kind of restricted capacity, I guarantee you're doing a fantastic job. What we just want to do is try and give you some free tools and opportunities to just go away and maybe think around things a little bit different. So yeah, in terms of some of the points that have come in, interest in Mark around people do think, I agree. I think people just always think sport's impactful. I also think that people wrongly assume that sport's just loaded with money. And, having, my background, I worked for the FA for a number of years, and everybody just assumed that grassroots football had loads of money because it all trickled down from the Premier League and from the FA, and that just wasn't the case, and it's impactful. I think, to your point, is it congruent? I don't know. That's something that you would need to kind of really start to look at yourself. And yeah, Martin's point around political support, locally, especially but nationally, is of vital importance. Well, we know that this year there's going to be a change in government. That doesn't mean a change in political party, but it does mean that, when there's a general election, quite often there's a cabinet shuffle, there's a different manifesto, there's a different set of strategic moments that they want to explore. So I think that's a really good point, when you're starting to look at what the risks are available to you, or that are, relevant to you. Stuff that you cannot control, such as a change in government, a change in political party, a change in movement in terms of what they feel around the kind of the non-profit sector. So yeah, it's really useful. Some great points there. Martin, thanks for coming. Mark, thanks for coming. And the rest of the session will be available on catch up. So yeah, thank you for everybody that's just contributed there. Well, we're moving on to the importance of how we actually arrive at a robust vision and mission, and I believe you're going to go through some practical examples for those on the call.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I think back to your point of how we normally approach our clients with vision and mission, and it's always different, and it's always a journey that we have to go on, and we always have to learn about the nuances of the charities that we're working with. And we've got a few examples. We've got two examples of strategic planning that I've personally been working on in the last few years. So the first one is Carers Trust, and Carers Trust are a large network organization that represent the voices of unpaid caring organizations and unpaid carers. And their network is 120 plus strong, and it spans across England, Wales, and Scotland. And the unique challenge that they had is that when you've got large network organizations or large membership organizations, the transparency of the value add is different for different members. So we really wanted to establish where the value was being had, or where the value was most impactful for the members. But we also wanted to establish what the priorities for the collective members, because they were the guys on the ground. So what we did to make sure that we arrived at the vision and mission statement is we almost targeted our consultation to include all of these network partners, which involve regional workshopping, which is basically entailed us really getting to grips with what they thought the membership could be and what it wasn't being at the moment. And then we arrived at unpaid carers are heard and valued with access to support, advice, and resources to enable them to live fulfilled lives. And this vision is essentially a complete reflection of the priorities of the 120 plus network organizations. And the mission, the how to, is almost what carers trusts are tasking themselves with. We work to transform the lives of unpaid carers through collaboration, influence, evidence, and innovation. And those last sort of four key words, they turned out to be their strategic pillars. So the collaboration was ensuring they were collaborating with partners, collaborating with the network, making sure they were being influential. They were channeling the voice of 120 network partners to influence decision makers in the local authority or in a national political standpoint. They were using evidence to channel their influence, and they were being innovative in their approach. So that was almost what we did with Carers Trust. And what came out was a really concise strategic plan that almost galvanized. And we talked about galvanizing staff. Carers Trust had to do that, but they also had to galvanize 120 plus members within their network. And we had to explore the different legal nuances around unpaid carers in England, Wales, and Scotland because the laws were slightly different. So we really went on a bit of a explanatory journey with Carers Trust, and I'm glad to say their strategy is doing really well and is coming to an end in 2027. And now a completely different example with a more narrowed approach is the National Brain Appeal. So the National Brain Appeal, and this is going to be fun for me to say, the National Brain Appeal essentially fundraises for projects on behalf of the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and the University College London of Queen Square Institute of Neurology. And I don't know if you've managed to work this one out, but I'm not an expert in neurology and neurosurgery. So we had to go on another journey to explore the nuances and a whole different industry. And what we found was the National Brain Appeal were almost relying on the insight from doctors and leading academics within neuroscience and neurosurgery to basically channel and fundraise projects through. So we need to make sure that the vision, we were bringing in doctors and these academics towards the vision. Another challenge that we had with them was that they were a fundraiser, and there was a perception within the charity that they were just fundraising and the impact wasn't theirs. They didn't own the impact that was being made through the great projects and the advancements that were made in neurology and neurosurgery. And then we challenged that, and we went through a large consultation process where one of the big questions was, can we say that National Brain Appeal have done this? Can we own the impact? And we went through another conversation around, do we mention the hospital, or are we our own standalone charity? And what we came out of that project with was transforming the lives of millions of people affected by neurological conditions. So to the charity's benefit, everyone, it was an agreement in terms of, yes, you do own that impact because you are a vital resource for the hospital and for the people affected by neurological conditions. And their mission was, we drive world-class neurological innovation, treatment and advancement through bold, ambitious fundraising and investment. So we're in the mission statement, they're almost saying we're driving the impact through our investment and our fundraising. And that was the intricacies. That's a kind of an example of the intricacies of how you can get your point across through these statements and satisfy all parties. But the National Brain Appeal really summed up how we've had to adapt to a completely different and quite a very specialist industry. But that one, I think this one ends in 2025, and we regularly keep tabs on all things National Brain Appeal. So this was a great example as well. Great. So we've gone through a few examples there, and like we've mentioned throughout the webinar, there's no almost rule book to creating your vision and mission statements. But Paul and I have deliberated back and forth, and we came out with 5 almost checkpoints or principles that we've seen across kind of all of or the majority of our strategy development projects. So start with the endpoint backwards. You need to remember my example about the idealistic painting. You need to have that in your mind before you start these conversations, and that needs to be at the forefront of your vision and mission creation. Then you need to involve your team and stakeholders. Like I mentioned, if you're expecting these statements to galvanize your staff teams and inspire them to strive towards a collective vision, and they've not been involved in the creation of said vision, then that's a large expectation. You need to make sure that they're a part of that process and they feel like they can own. And that's a big point, creating that sense of ownership of those vision and mission statements. And then know what makes your organization special. I used an example earlier about if you're in a quite a competitive landscape with your charity, you need to make sure that your charity's head is above the parapet. You need to know what makes your charity unique and what makes your charity special. And this is where an extensive stakeholder consultation project really comes into its own, because then you might think that you're unique because of X, but the rest of your stakeholders might think you're unique because of why. And you need to make sure that your uniqueness is embodied and channeled in your vision and mission statement. Keep it simple. Like we mentioned earlier, these statements need to be understood by a wide variety of people. The more clear they are, the more objective they are, the better they're going to be understood and the better they're going to transcend. And I think it being simple, the more simple it is and the less detailed it is, means it's probably going to be going to have more longevity in the future. And then test it out. I think once you've arrived at maybe a few examples of a good vision and mission statement, I think it would be worthwhile to then test it with your team, volunteers, beneficiaries, and supporters, and then ask for feedback and adjust if necessary. But these five are really the principles that we've kind of came out with after an extensive kind of portfolio of strategy development projects we've worked on.
No, that's great. Well, I think they're, for anybody who's going through this process or who's coming to the end of a kind of end of their current strategy cycle, taking some of those principles that are relevant to you, and kind of trying to apply them. If it's something you're doing in-house, I'm sure would be of great benefit. So, cheers for sharing that. Well, what we're going to now move on to is we asked. So this is the first time we've actually done it this way on our webinars, where we asked a question in the sign up process, where we kind of said, if you've got a challenge, if you want a question that you want specifically answered, that we can actually have a little bit of time to think about in advance and prepare an appropriate response, rather than kind of questions that come in on the day, which are great. So we've got 3 questions that I'm looking at the timer. I think we've got time to go through all of them in a little bit of detail. So whoever it is that submitted these, thank you very much. This is something that we wanted to test out, and if we can then give you a little bit of a steer on how you can kind of address that internally, then we've done our job here today. So just moving on to the first one. So this was one of the responses from the survey was, what more can we do to encourage collaboration and ensure everyone understands how their work contribute to the vision and mission? And I think Will pointed out, and he re-emphasised probably 3 or 4 times, I think I heard him, around that communication and getting staff buy-in. And for me, that's exactly it. Ensuring that collaboration is at the heart of what you do. That will foster teamwork, culture. It will help individuals to connect their roles to the broader organisational goals. So I've got 4 ways that I would personally approach that question. I'm sure Will's got some himself. But clear communication of the vision and mission. However you communicate with your colleagues, whether that be newsletters, whether it be Teams channels, literature posters that are up in your office, whatever it might be, make sure that your vision and mission is always on show. This is not a book that you write, that you close, that you put back in the library. This is something that should be living and breathing and part of your everyday culture, your everyday life in your organisation. So whatever format as it is, really, and then try and look at the storytelling. How do we kind of bring some of that to life? And I know somebody's mentioned some great points in the chat around what they're doing. So that's really important. The other aspect I would look at is, how do you align an individual's goals to the organisational's goals and vision? Because if you as an individual work for an organisation where you think nothing I do contributes to the bigger picture, it can become pretty disenchanting, disenfranchising. So being able to go, do you know what? I know that even though I'm working in isolation over here in this corner and I'm doing this little piece of work, I know that that plays a much bigger role and it plays a much bigger part of what the organisation or the charity is trying to achieve. For me, something that I try and as a leader, I try and portray, but also I look for in kind of my leadership is transparent decision making. You know, involving employees in the decision-making process where appropriate, you know, especially for decisions that affect their work or align with the overall organisation's vision and mission. I think when you include people, inclusion then fosters a sense of ownership, and I know Will just mentioned that before. And when people have a sense of ownership, they have a sense of commitment, and you know they feel valued, and then you know we know that fosters a much stronger culture. And then the last thing that I'll add is just around feedback loops. I think it's really important that you create some kind of mechanism, whatever that looks like, if it's kind of in your one-to-ones, your team meetings, whatever it might be, but where employees can actually see how their work contributes to the vision and mission improvements. You know, there's loads of different ways you can do that, whether it be staff surveys or, like I said, you know, anecdotal conversations. But I think it's really important, especially for more junior members of your team that don't necessarily sit on that board level or have those strategic discussions on a daily basis, that they can actually feel connected to the wider organisation. So that's just the 4 points that I would cover. I don't know if there's anything, Will, that I've not covered off that you feel would bolster that.
No, I think the joint goal setting is really important. If you think of your vision and mission as the top of your strategy, and all of your departments sit beneath that, if all of those departments have goals each, and each employee has objectives, and they can clearly see the continuous thread from their role that leads all the way up to the vision, then they know that what they're doing on a daily basis. Your example, Paul, of doing a small piece of work in the corner somewhere, they know that that piece of work is important and contributes to a larger vision. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. Great. Well, hopefully, whoever submitted it, hopefully you're on the call. If you want to follow up off the back of this, or if you don't feel comfortable messaging in the chat, and you just want a bit more clarity on what we've said, or you want us to put that in writing, more than happy to do so. But yeah, hopefully that kind of just answers that question just from Will and I's viewpoint. So we've got a second one that came in. So yeah, and I'm sure everybody on this call can probably relate to this in some way. So like many charities, our biggest challenge is a lack of financial resources. What advice would you give to organisations trying to develop a strategy on a budget? So Will and I actually had some different views on this, and actually Will's point that he made to me yesterday, I thought was really valuable. So I'm going to let you lead on this, if that's okay, and then I'll come in afterwards.
Yeah. My first point is that the entire strategy development process isn't that hard in terms of isn't that strenuous in terms of resources. I wouldn't say it's not easy. If it was easy, Paul and I would be out of a job. But I think it doesn't need to be that difficult. And I think what we've experienced most of the time with clients from a resourcing standpoint, or lack of resources, is a lack of time and a lack of priority. Oftentimes, oftentimes we step inside a charity or a sport for development organization, and strategy is seen as something that's almost done over here, and the day-to-day stuff sits over here, and both don't meet. But what you're doing with strategy is you're making the day-to-day a lot clearer, and you're making the day-to-day have a direction. And I think it'll be interesting to know who put this question forward, because I'd love to discuss it more, because it's almost like this question is asking, how do we, throughout the strategy, how do we finance that direction? And if that's that's an entirely kind of different question. But I think what strategy and vision and mission tend to do is narrow the focus. I think so. I think really with this question, I would say if you're one of the reasons you're not starting is lack of financial resources, I think hopefully after this webinar, you know what that step one is, and throughout the process, you know that it's not going to elicit a massive financial burden to get this strategy right. And I think the collaboration point of view, if you're a charity that works with multiple different partners, they'd be happy to support the strategy development process. Your volunteers lean on your board members, lean on your staff, lead on who you know within your sector to support you. It doesn't need to be something that needs to be financed, I wouldn't say. And Paul, happy for you to challenge your.
No, I think that last point was just the point I was going to add around, each of you here will have a board. You can't exist as a charity without the proper governance. Look at the board, look at where their expertise lie, look at where their connections are. Even if they're not experienced in strategy development, do they have contacts that are? Is that something that you want to think about the next time you go out to recruit a new trustee? We want somebody that's got that background. Quite often it's somebody that's got a fundraising background or a marketing background or a legal background, especially for smaller charities. Utilise the skill sets that are available. I think that's really important. You mentioned well about that narrowing that focus. I think that's really important. It's focusing on those core activities. So identifying the activities that really align to your mission from the start and drilling down into them. There is so much content on the internet. We've got like I mentioned earlier, plugging it again, but the free bundle that we've got, there's aspects in there that would help you write a strategy. But also look at some of the free tools that are available, from everything from graphic design tools like Canva to social media management and project management tools like Trello and all of this stuff. There's very, either you get a benefit, a preferential rate as a charity or a not-for-profit, but there's also a lot of free licenses available out there. So again, just look at what's out there. And then the last thing is if you're a small charity, keep it lean. Make sure that your strategic planning you take a lean approach to that. So, short, actionable plans that can be implemented quickly and that can be adjusted as needed. That allows you as a small organisation to be much more flexible. If you're relatively small, you might not have the confidence to go into a 10-year strategy because you might be living a little bit hand to mouth in terms of you don't know where your next donation's coming from. So you might want to just shorten that down. And I think that's really, there's no. We're working with a very complex client just now who has 4 massive stakeholders, each feeling that their voice should be the loudest, and we're the ones in the middle trying to take that objective, independent approach. And obviously know what I'm talking about. And they're undecided on, do we want a 10-year strategy, a 5-year, a 4, and all the different stakeholders, and we're just trying to kind of bring that in. But for the smaller organisations out there, really taking that lean approach, I think is that really, really crucial. Okay, so we've got one more question. We're actually, for a change, we're actually running to time, which is great. So this question here, how can we develop a long-term strategy which is still responsive to the rapidly changing times and tides? So I'm happy to take this one at the start, and then by all means, mate, if you want to jump in. So for me, given why we're here today, I think I'll start off with establishing a clear vision and mission. I think that's really, really important. If you've got a crystal clear vision and mission that will be forward-thinking yet inspirational, they will allow you to really be that North Star, that guide, guiding your organisation through the changing circumstance. That doesn't mean that it can't be adapted, and that's where some of the underpinning points come. So looking at how you scenario plan. So looking at, a lot of organisations done this during COVID, but looking at what are the best possible future scenario, the worst case scenario if something should happen. And then for each scenario, start to look at how would we adapt to that? What would be our what preparation do we need to put in place to ensure that as an organisation that we can pivot as needed whilst keeping sight of that long-term goal. The next point would be around flexible strategic objectives. So, I always think you should set ambitious strategic objectives, but making sure that they are adaptable. So instead of rigid goals, consider setting a range of outcomes that allow for flexibility, review them regularly, adjust them as needed. The environment's going to flex and change. and I think making sure that you're not so rigid that if something happens that you just can't, you're just stuck in your ways. For me, empowering decision making, I don't like to micromanage teams, and I don't like when we see that happen. I think when you cultivate a culture that people can make autonomous decisions and that they can make those decisions quickly and in response and be reactive when the opportunity to be proactive isn't present is really important. And then just the last 2 points I would make is just around having that robust risk management. Um, every charity should have a risk register. We know that they don't. We know that sometimes the boards of charities might not just have the resources or the aptitude or the skill set to be able to do that. But having a robust risk management or a risk register where you can always look at kind of what could be coming down the line, doing that horizon scanning. And again, back to the scenario planning, kind of what could we do if a major funder drops out? If we're getting funded by an organisation and they're making up 70% of our income, what does that look like if they pull out? What efficiencies do we have to make? Does there have to be redundancies? Do we have to stop some of the programmatic delivery? And then the most important thing is just having those regular reviews. You can have a 10-year strategy. There's nothing wrong with that. But then I would probably have a 2 or 3 year review point. The vision stays the same, but the objectives and the strategic direction might change because of what's happening in the landscape. And actually, where you were kind of going straight ahead, you might have to just break right and kind of come round the mountain instead of going over it because of what's happened. So yeah, being able to be flexible and being agile is really, really important. And I think if you put all of those key points in that I just mentioned, that gives you at least a chance of reacting to stuff that might come down the road, notwithstanding nobody seen COVID coming and that turned the world upside down and we don't know what's down the line in a year or 2 years' time. But I don't think you should be scared of having a long-term strategy with a long-term vision. I think that shouldn't be something that scares people. Just make sure you've got those kind of check-in points. I don't know if you agree, Will.
Yeah, I agree with all those points. I think the regular review periods are something that I would absolutely champion. I would establish a strategy committee made up of board members, some internal staff, maybe some external stakeholders, and you're almost every 6 months or every year of that strategy, you're almost scrutinizing the document and making sure that your sector's context is and your strategy is still relevant towards your sector's current context, I would say. So I think, yeah, just really reinforcing that point, Paul. But this is something that and also, it is really difficult to plan for change. Yeah, it's not something that typically though planning and change don't really come into the same context, but there are things we can tweak about those kind of more agile goal settings and the scenario planning, Paul. But I also think if you find yourself in, during COVID, a lot of charities look to thought leaders within their sector to almost influence what the next step is. I think it's about having all of that insight, directing all of the insight that's inbound into your kind of your phone, your emails, to make sure that you're really clued up on what's going on in your sector, so you can almost foresee the changes to come.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's spot on. Well, look, that's us. God, an hour's flown by. Thank you so much for everyone who has contributed, who has put in some fantastic content and some fantastic questions. We've got a couple of minutes, so if anybody does have a question, please reach out. Please pop a note in if you don't want to do it in a public forum. Myself and Will are both on LinkedIn. Our email addresses are available. I'll follow up with everyone after the call. These sessions are only relevant if we know what people need and want. So if you feel like there's something that you would love us to do a webinar in the future, please just drop us a note and say we'd love this topic to be covered off. We know we're good at what we do, but we absolutely don't have all the answers. And we learn just as much from our clients as hopefully they learn from us, and that allows us to then go forward and work with other organisations as well. So, if nobody, we do have one question from Daniel. What happens when you achieve your goal sooner than expected? Do you wrap up the charity? So it was interesting. I made that point earlier, Daniel, where, if Alzheimer's, if Cancer Research UK cured cancer completely tomorrow, then do they still need to exist? Then the answer is probably no, not in their current format. Um, there's organisations, one that I used to work with very closely, Help for Heroes, they existed. They were founded to raise £1 million to build a gym for wounded veterans. That was their whole purpose. Well, they done that, and you could have argued that that could have been the end of them, but then they decided to reset another goal, to reset their vision, and actually they wanted to create a network of um, sites across the UK where they could actually have residential support for veterans. And then they done that, and then they changed again. So they have pivoted to what the need of the core beneficiary group is. So I don't necessarily feel you have to close, but if your goal is to, eradicate cancer and you do that, then that goal becomes null and void, and you kind of have to look at what the next one might be. And if there isn't one, then absolutely maybe that is the case, that you've achieved what you set out to do, and absolutely fantastic. And I don't think anybody should ever look down on a charity that decides to kind of close its doors after it's achieved its strategic objectives. Hopefully that answers it. Look, thank you so much for taking the time. We know how busy you all are. We love being able to do these. We'll be doing some more of them, so hopefully you'll sign up, pass it on to your kind of colleagues and friends across your networks. The more people, the better for us. It's fantastic to see you all, and yeah, we look forward to speaking to you in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.